You asked me how I'm doing, and all I can tell you is that I'm making country playlists. I don't think I'm alone in having January be a very rough month for mental health, and February. We're already almost done February. Winter is a lot, and it has been a lot, and I think that especially where I live in Canada, it is dark all of the time. It is snowy, it is gross, and it's just not particularly fun. So I thought I'd make a video recommending some books that I thought would help in the winterness of life. And there's kind of two aspects of this. You can really lean into the melancholic winter sadness, or you can try to go for super happiness. I'm not really gonna go to the super happiness because even in my best days I'm not incarnate joy, but I do love hope within despair. So these are books that I think are beautiful and fun and poignant and a little wintry and a little sad, but also very hopeful. And if you're kind of feeling a little down and a little depressed, they're also almost all really short, which I think is incredibly, because I have not been reading. I have read one book in February, and that is a record. I thought I would begin with the book that kind of inspired this. This is kind of also inspired by Books Unbound, which is one of my favorite podcasts, and I love every Sunday to listen to it, and they had a question related to this. I was like, I need to read it. Even though I haven't been reading lately, I will pick this up, and it is only 2 hours on audiobook. I think it's 120 pages. It is beautiful, and it really put me in the vibe to be positive again, even though it's kind of depressing, but also kind of really good. So this is Small Things Like These, which is by Claire Keegan, and it is set in this rural, small town, Irish town in the 1980s. All of this guy whose name is Bill Furlong, his mother was 16 when he was born, and the rest of their family just kind of was like, yeah, no, we're good. I think it said something about when Sarah's trouble began to be showing, her family let her know that they'd have nothing to do with her. And then she went to her employer, who was a maid, and she's a Protestant in this very Catholic town, and she lets her know, and she says rather than letting her go, she instead keeps her on and lets her live there for the rest of her life. And her son gets raised in the kitchens, and he has this yearning though of who his father is, who everything is, and it has resulted in him being very kind. Even his wife is a little snarky of how much change do you give away today? And it is a very rough time, an economic time when it's not very good, and yet he is still compassionate, and he is a coal merchant who has worked through, he liked books, and he had the ability to read growing up through this woman's library. And he's had a lot of loss and a lot of questions of where did I end up? And I think that the dry questionings of life and the kind of overtones of complacency, it also kind of looks at how one moment of choice can really help someone's life. The woman choosing to keep her on as a maid. He's kind of confronted with it when he gives a delivery at the nunnery and kind of notices that things seem a little bit odd. And when he starts kind of asking questions or just existing, people keep on telling him to just stay clear that, he has 5 daughters of his own and he doesn't want to, stir the boat. He's really looking at what is the right choice here. The reason that I thought this was perfect for this is I feel like feeling aimless or directionless or we're never going to get through this situation is something that sometimes feels in winter. And I think this is a book that is very wintry. It's leading up to Christmas, and it's also asking the question of what choices do I make and how do my choices matter? And I think this book has something to say that even the little choices, even the small choices, even the way that we orient ourselves toward other people really, really changes people's lives. The next book I chose is very different, but I think that it has some similar vibes underneath the surface, and this is Raybearer by Jordan Fico. This is definitely one of my favorite books of last year. I read it in January and then I reread it in fall. I think that it has this kind of overtones of this huge fantasy, and it's YA, and it's growing up in a court, and it has this mystery of will she kill the prince? But in the end, it's a story about this girl growing up and having insecurities and questions and finding family. And I think that books that deal with people growing up always make me feel a little bit cozy. And even in both of these last books, their growing up lives were not particularly great. It had moments of friendliness and moments of love, but it also had a lot of abuse and stuff going on. And I think that both of these have hope within it, and I think that this is the perfect fantasy. I found the world really, really immersive. I found, the twists and turns really compelling, and the characters really honest, and especially since she is able to look and she's able to touch things, and when she touches things, she's able to see the history, so there's a connectiveness there too that I really, really love. So if you're in the mood for YA or fantasy or any of those things, I think this one is a great option. And the next one is Dearly by Margaret Atwood. She is obviously a force. Everyone knows who she is, but this was my first book by her and the one that really sold me over, and it is Dearly, and it really looks at, her growing up in the 40s and 50s, and it's a collection of poetry. And we also look at her coming of age in the 60s, and we even have some poems that were never published at the time. But then it also has this gripping part where she's talking about the loss of her partner after, I think, 40 years of them together. And it's not a quick loss, it's a slow loss to dementia. and it has a lot of like wintry kind of vibes in it too. It also came out in December, and she talks about like seeing his footprints in the snow, or seeing kind of the images of him when he's gone or when he was still there but losing things. And yeah, I think that it has this hope and this like grief in it, because she's obviously treasuring the times that they spent together and losing him, but it's a sadness that's also looking at the lovely things and the small things of life. And I think that it's a beautiful collection. It is a book that I think about all of the time, and I really, really adore it. And I know poetry isn't everyone's option, but I think that especially these poems are very, very accessible to anyone. Passing has gotten a lot of attention more in the last little bit because the movie came out and there's comparison to that in The Vanishing Half, but I kind of discovered this before the hype, and I'm almost a little bit glad because it was an adventure just to go through and like not know anything about it and not have like any kind of conversation around it beforehand. But this is a story about these two women who have grown up together, and it's 15-20 years later, and one is married and has children and is very involved in their like Black community and these dances and in the social life of it. And it's set in the 1920s in Harlem. And then the other one is a woman who passed for white and married this incredibly racist man. It really looks at these two women's lives and where they showed, and it has this kind of undercurrent of tension below it. And even in the end, like, you keep on guessing and kind of questioning the things. And I really need to reread it and like watch the movie. It's in black and white. I'm really excited to do that. But I think that this has like, it's also really, really short, so you can read it in one sitting or, in a few sittings, and it also will keep you going when also having this really introspection and questions about existence, because that is where my head always is. This one is not going to be a surprise. This is the Anthropocene Reviewed. John Green is one of my favorite people. He's one of my favorite authors, and I think that this one can be a little bit hard if you're not familiar with John Green, because he is very pretentious, but his pretentiousness is not a put on. I relate to him because everyone is like, John Green's books do not, like, teenagers don't like talk like teenagers. And I was like, I talk like that as a teenager. I still kind of talk like that. I've always been undercurrent of like thinking too much about the universe, and he really thinks a lot about the universe. And I think that if you're familiar with him, sometimes people will kind of think of it a little trite, but I think that knowing the sincerity behind it is really good. So I really recommend the podcast too, which is free and you can test out, especially if you're dealing with mental health. Harvey and Auld Lang Syne are probably the two that have really, I'm cut back to a lot and a lot. Harvey is particularly about a mental breakdown he had at 23. And, he talks a lot about wanting to go from despair into hope. And he's someone who struggles a lot with mental health and has talked a lot about it. And I think that this book is just beautiful and it makes me really happy. I still haven't finished it. I, keep on going. I'm writing notes and I wrote my own reviews and stuff off it. And it's like in a small hug every single time. And I really appreciate being able to think about the world and also being touched emotionally and also having lots of humor. And it's just great. And if you love books, like, he quotes all the time and is just open about the fact that he loves quoting all the time. So yeah, I think that it's really beautiful. One of the things that makes me so happy in life is women's fiction from like 1960s and 70s. I love feminism. I love just this like kind of like mid-century feel. It makes me so happy. And this is very low-key. She is a woman who was, this kind of scandalous thing in the 1960s, and she wrote all these articles, and it's not really well known to the public now. Her daughter is an author, Meg Wiltzer, and she's Hilma Wiltzer. She published this book that has a collection of her stories in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and then the one that takes place during the pandemic right at the end, which is a little bit different, but I think that it still is writing in the same vein 40 years later, which is also incredible. And she's like 95 now. And yeah, this is called Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket. And it really looks at, kind of the undercurrent of being a woman, of being a mother, of being a person that is revolving all this. It has one of this collection about like insomnia, which anyone who struggled with that will definitely relate to that. I think that it's very introspective and very funny and also very commonplace. If you like exciting books and that's how you get out of depression, I'm sorry, I'm not the person for you. And this is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. This is the book that I have recommended the most and have had the most positive recommendations through like recommending this book, because I recommended it to my roommate who loved it. I recommended it to my friend who had a concussion. She listened to it and absolutely loved it. My friend who hates nonfiction loved it. Her father, who had a stroke, who she was reading to in the hospital, absolutely loved it. It's also a great book to like read with other people. A guy I went on a date with who like really wanted to impress me by reading, read it and absolutely loved him, although that doesn't necessarily mean anything because he also tried to convince me he really wanted to read Anna Karenina, and I was like, dude, I think I need to let you down before you read like 1,000 pages of a book you don't want and I'm not into you. But it's a book that really just has touched me and I love. And I think the more time passes, the more I think about it and the more I love it. Like, I think about this book so often, and it's about this like group of hostages. We have this character who is trying to support their kids and can't, so they rob a bank and they're completely ill prepared and they run across the street and into this open house, and the open house has like so many different people, from this like high class woman who like always just goes to these lookings, to this family that are about to expecting their first child, to this old couple, to this middle-aged couple, to, you know, some laughability things there. It's a lot, and it's like this big family and heartfelt, but also like so funny and real. And I don't know, I think about the jokes, I think about the humor, I think about like, we're all a little bit of idiots. We think of the Stockholmers, like, and like how like there's a joke throughout like that, you know, being a Stockholmer means different things to different people, because it's said in Sweden, he translates his fiction. And I don't know, I think that it's just, it has that thing where it sounds like it would be really cliche, but it's so good and heartfelt and funny and lovely. And I need to read it again. I just got it back because like it's been like a year of like being lent out to everyone. I already feel better talking about these books. Let me know some books that have helped you or you think would be helpful to people who are struggling with SAD, because SAD isn't SAD, just sad, which, you know, sometimes that's what depression feels like. However, if you want to share music or movies or podcasts and things like that, that also is great. I just listen to really like depressing indie music and country music now, apparently, because that's where my life has gone. Well, that fell. I hope that you're having a great week, and I would love to see you in the comments, and it would make me really happy. Have a great day. Bye.